Hello, everyone. Hi, everyone. My name is Michela Goodwin, and I am the chair of the Oceania RDA committee. And I'd like to start by acknowledging that I'm hosting this webinar from the country of the Ngunnawal people. I also recognise the traditional owners of the countries where you all work today and the Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander people present in this webinar. Welcome and thank you for attending the third webinar that AUDAC has hosted this year. We are recording this webinar, and this and our other webinars are all available on the RDA Toolkit YouTube page. AUDAC members wish to empower you to shape and change resource description and access, RDA, via the RDA Steering Committee, the RSC. So please join our mailing list to keep up to date on the RDA world and to find out how you can be part of the decision-making process. Today, we are hosting the National, State and Territory Libraries Australasia, or NSLA, who is leading the Australia-wide project to transition the library and information sector to official RDA. We'll hear from Aimee Hay, a librarian who's worked in public and state libraries across Queensland, Victoria and the Northern Territory. Aimee is currently the Program Coordinator at National and State Libraries Australasia, where her role includes project managing the NSLA official RDA project. Melissa Parent, a Senior Librarian, Acquisitions and Description at the State Library Victoria, a former AUDAC representative on the RDA Steering Committee and a current member of the Australian Committee on Resource Description. And she's extremely passionate about RDA. And lastly, but not least, we have Colleen Hayes, a librarian with experience across public, special and government libraries, who is currently the Program Manager in Collection Management at the National Library of Australia. She's passionate about equitable information discovery and is focused on implementing descriptive practices like official RDA to enhance access to all our collections. If you have any questions, please feel free to use the Q&A button at the bottom of the screen, and we will get to those at the end of the presentation. But for now, I'll hand over to Aimee. Thank you.
Thanks, Michela. I'll just pop my slides up just a moment. Okay, hopefully you should be seeing our slide deck there. Fantastic. Okay, so firstly, I thought I'd explain who NSLA is and why we're doing this project. National and State Libraries Australasia, or NSLA, is a collaboration between national, state and territory libraries across Australia and Aotearoa, New Zealand. The NSLA collaboration spans 10 libraries across 2 countries and too many time zones to count, and has been active in one form or another for over 50 years. Whoops. Staff at NSLA libraries give their time and expertise to contribute to projects and professional networks, and have developed new systems and services, undertaken research, created policy and written submissions to the government for the benefit of the library sectors and users across Australia and Aotearoa, New Zealand. Some of NSLA's work includes leading the sector and solving challenges such as the National E-Deposit, otherwise known as NED, as well as working towards continuous improvement in the form of networks, discussions and roundtables. So why are we doing this project? The original idea for a collaborative approach to implementing official RDA in the Australian library sector began in 2023. Michela Goodwin and Julia Hickey from the National Library of Australia raised the possibility with the NSLA Heads of Collections Advisory Group. The Heads of Collections agreed that a collaborative approach would be beneficial, as no single library organisation in Australia has the capacity or sector reach to complete this work and deliver outcomes that can be applied across the Australian sector within the timeframe required. It was also seen as essential to do this work and to contextualise official RDA for the Australian context, particularly regarding First Nations knowledge and material. The NSLA collaboration was an ideal group to undertake this project, as it meant we could leverage the metadata expertise and work already undertaken across our NSLA libraries. In March 2024, the NSLA board, which is made up of the chief executives of the NSLA libraries, requested a period of scoping work to be undertaken ahead of endorsing a collaborative NSLA approach. Melissa Parent, who's here today, undertook the scoping work on behalf of NSLA, so I'll hand over to Melissa to take you through what she found.
Thank you, Aimee, and apologies, everybody. I've been battling one of the nasty colds that's been going around, so apologies if I have a coughing fit. I will aim not to. So the scoping work that I did really sort of deepened everything that Michela and Julia had been thinking when they brought this to NSLA as a possibility. So I became the NSLA official RDA scoping officer with some knowledge that was based on my RSC membership learnings and also some assumptions from the work that I had done at the State Library of Victoria to prepare for official RDA implementation. So some prior knowledge was that I knew that an official RDA implementation for any agency would require that the agency either create or have access to metadata application profiles. Metadata application profiles are documents that define which RDA elements of the 1,000 plus possible elements, which elements is an agency actually going to use in their descriptive metadata practices. We would definitely need we would definitely need sort of like a set of nationally agreed upon application profiles. I also knew that minimally for each element that's defined in a metadata application profile, an agency would need to know which of the various options at that element would they apply, because almost everything in official RDA is an option. Almost everything. And this is a really incredible asset to official RDA as a descriptive standard because it ensures great flexibility. You can implement official RDA in a number of different ways in a variety of metadata creation contexts, which could include linked data contexts. However, as marvelous as that is in theory, in practice, the fact that almost everything is an option in an official RDA implementation is also a big challenge for agencies, having to make those decisions. So I knew we're going to need application profiles that we sort of nationally agree upon. We're also going to need policy statements that we can nationally agree on. I also came in with the assumption that based on the work that I'd begun at my own agency, it would take at least 1.0 FTE resourcing for a year, minimally, for any agency that wished to prepare for official RDA independently. And that was if there was at least one staff member who was reasonably confident in official RDA language and also in the concepts in order to lead those implementation efforts. So I had the knowledge we need application profiles, we need policy statements. It's going to be at least 1.0 FTE to do those for any agency. Those are sort of like the knowledge and assumptions I brought in. And then I did my scoping. Scoping was very consultative. I spoke with managers, I spoke with team leaders, I spoke with catalogers, of course, from agencies across numerous sectors. I checked in with, their overall RDA engagement and use of RDA and what their sense was about official RDA. In most cases, there was an incredible appetite to implement official RDA, but a complete void in how to do so. And that really showed how incredibly valuable the NSLA project would be. But also, it was very clear that absolutely very few agencies were in a position to resource an independent implementation. So all the agencies that I spoke to were like, this is a wonderful project. I hope it goes ahead. And a lot of interest in ensuring that the national approach that we took would meet the needs of their local patrons and the data requirements for Trove Collaborative Services. Conversations with Australian metadata agencies excuse me, also really did reveal that there was also an incredible appetite to ensure that our metadata practices would be inclusive. And inclusive metadata in the Australian context, of course, includes attention to, our colonial context. Many agencies are interacting with resources created by First Nations or about First Nations peoples, and they want guidance in ensuring that their descriptive practices meet those needs. So finally, it was also very clear, and I knew this would happen in those conversations with multiple agencies, that there was a role for documentation that was sort of born out of our current Mark 21 encoding environment, because we have application profiles and we have policy statements, but we're still working in a Mark 21 environment. So a set of documents that would sort of bring the application profiles and the policy statements together in a way that sort of made it make sense for people who are still in a Mark 21 encoding environment. So scoping outcomes were Collaborative approach, yes, please, 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 please. Please make sure that the collaborative approach is inclusive and contextual for Australia. And we definitely need to have an extra set of documents, not just the application profiles and the policy statements. We also need documents about to bring those together and contextualize it in a Mark 21 environment. So after consulting, I created a project plan and costings, and then I handed it over to the NSLA board. Back to you, Aimee.
Thanks, Melissa. Ultimately, the NSLA board endorsed a project to create minimal critical documentation required to contextualise official RDA for the Australian LAS sector. And noting that we didn't have the time and resources to do a thorough review of official RDA, our goal is to provide baseline official RDA documentation. The model that the NSLA board chose was a consultation model where participation will be limited to Australian NSLA libraries, with IATSIS included as a key partner, and non-NSLA organisations would be consulted at appropriate intervals. It was felt that this would be the easiest and quickest way to undertake this project, given the time frame that we had. So as part of the scoping work, Melissa created a project plan that we've largely implemented unchanged. So the project comprises a project manager, a steering group, and 3 working groups. Each of the groups has representatives from Australian NSLA libraries, and all of the national, state and territory libraries are represented in at least one group, with IATSIS as a member of the steering group. The original project plan proposed engaging a project manager for 1 day a week. However, the NSLA board endorsed absorbing this work into the NSLA office operations, as it was thought that this would be more flexible. And that's proven to be the right choice, as I do some official RDA project work most days, and it just wouldn't have worked if one person was just doing it 1 day a week. This does mean that a metadata expert isn't managing the project, because I'm definitely not a metadata expert. But the steering group and working group members have heaps of metadata knowledge, so I don't see that as a problem. I just fall back on their expertise. I'm just there to crack the whip and make sure things are happening on time. The working groups are responsible for reviewing and contextualising official RDA. Decisions are intended to be made by consensus or by majority where consensus isn't possible. And in extreme cases, the option to go to the official RDA steering group for decision, and also for the steering group to provide clarity around decisions. The steering group also ensures that the project is on time and remaining within the project scope, because we do have that limited scope. I attend all the working group meetings and report back to the steering group and the NSLA board. So as you can see, there are 3 working groups. We've got the metadata application profile or MAP working group, policy statement working group, and the workflows working group. Each of the working groups have co-leads who guide the discussion and direct the work for the group. The working groups meet weekly, with the steering group meeting monthly. And the co-leads meet fortnightly while they're working concurrently, so that they can share information. The original project plan intended for the working groups to be filled entirely by NSLA library staff. However, it was later decided to extend an invitation to CALL, or the Council of Australasian University Librarians, to participate in the policy statement working group, because we thought that there needed to be more numbers in that group given the amount of work that needed to be undertaken. So through that, the policy statement working group now includes a member from the University of Technology, Sydney, which is a really valuable input. So as I mentioned, the MAP and policy statement working groups are currently working at the same time, so they meet, and we have the workflows working group, which will be stood up in July 2026, which brings me to the timeline of our project. So the project is intended to run for 2 years, and it started at the start of this year, and we're currently on track with our key dates. So application profiles are due to be completed in August 2025, and Melissa will take you through that later. Policy statements are due to be completed in June 2026, and we anticipate being able to provide both the policy statements and application profiles to LAS educators in July 2026, so that they can start preparing for the transition. The workflows should be completed by December 2026, which will also see the conclusion of the project. At this point, I'd like to thank National Library of New Zealand for their generosity in sharing their time and learnings with us, because it's definitely informed the way that we're undertaking our project. So I'd like to hand back to Melissa now, who will give you the MAP working group update.
Thank you, Aimee. So as Aimee mentioned, the MAP working group is comprised of members from NSLA libraries, and we have 1 member who is also a member of the policy statement working group. So the metadata application profiles are very if you let them, they're very technical and complex documents. So we've tried to, as much as possible, keep them practical and RDA aligned, of course, but we are also conscious of the fact that we're still working in a Mark 21 encoding environment. So we spent some time as a group talking through sort of the essentials of an application profile, and really as a group grappling with how are we going to accommodate our Mark 21 encoding environment while we are also very much thinking in RDA. After those initial discussions, members then took responsibility for one or more application profiles, and which were then reviewed by another team member. So my co-lead Glenn Wells at State Library New South Wales and I are now doing a final line-by-line review of all profiles. Can I get next slide, please, Aimee? So we are finalizing draft maps for resource formats. So that includes the full suite that we've got on the screen. So we've got cartographic images, diachronic works, also known as serials. We've got manuscripts in there, monographs, manuscripts in a library description context, not an archival context. We're doing, of course, the bog standard monographs or books. We've got moving images. We've got a little subset for our national e-deposit, our NED resources. We've got notated music, pictures, realia, and recorded music. So we've got that whole suite in there. So we're finalizing draft maps for resources. We are also finalizing draft maps for that would support authority work. So how do you construct an authorized access point and create an authority record for corporate bodies, families, persons, and places? Time span, we're still a little bit iffy on. So if you think that you would definitely like to see an application profile for a time span, let us know through our various channels, which we'll discuss later. And that's me.
Thank you, Melissa. Hi, everyone. I'm Colleen. I'm one of the co-leads for the Policy Statement Working Group, along with Tom Norkie from the State Library of New South Wales. So as Aimee and Melissa mentioned, the next stage of the project is the development and testing of policy statements for official RDA. And this work is happening concurrently with the MAPS working group. And our focus is to develop the policy statements with a specific focus on the Australian library context. So the approach we've been taking, as Aimee and Melissa have outlined a few times with the initial research findings, is that NSLA has adopted a collaborative model to complete this work. And the basis of the collaborative model is to ensure equitable participation from NSLA and other stakeholders within the Australian library sector. So in our group, we have representation across NSLA libraries, as well as one representative from CORE, but we do hope in the future that we'll have a representative from IATSIS. Our main approach is to ensure that we take a standards agnostic approach or an RDA first approach, and that will ensure that the statements developed can be easily mapped to both MARC currently, as well as future standards such as BibFrame. And this decision was made early on upon the advice from Anushka Maguire from the National Library of New Zealand. Tom and I had a meeting with her a couple of months ago, who noted that staff who were able to think in RDA first were able to better understand and implement the policies in their cataloguing work. So we've been taking that approach moving forward. The MAPS group and the workflow group will be practically implementing the RDA policy statements to a MARC standard, but the role of the policy statement group is to ensure that these policies are dynamic enough that the work we're doing now doesn't need to be changed in a few years' time when we move to BibFrame. As Aimee mentioned, the policy statement group started working in March 2025, and we anticipate that we'll finish in June 2026. So we're still in the very early stages of our work. And the key considerations that we've been looking at are similar to what Melissa mentioned above, ensuring that we're thinking about description from the Australian perspective. And that's especially important when it comes to looking at material within Australian First Nations context. And we've already seen that early on with the policy statement group, where we've already had to make decisions tailored around an Australian First Nations approach, and that's been in statements for normalised transcription and diachronic works. We've been using the policy statements from the National Library of New Zealand as our main guide, especially as it relates to First Nations description due to the similarities in our descriptive practices. But we've also been comparing the policy statements from both the British Library and Library of Congress, and that's just been able to help round out our understanding of the policies, see how other institutions are applying these policies, and just to help guide our decision making. Next slide, please, Amy. As you can see, as I mentioned, we're still very early on in the process. So currently we've completed 8 policy statements. They're listed on the left-hand side. And we currently have 2 statements in progress. And we do have 1 statement that's about to go to the steering committee for some advice. So typically we get through about 1 policy per session, but that depends on the size of the policy, of course. Happy to talk about how we've worked if that's of interest to anyone, but just for the sake of time, I'm happy to leave that in the end. If everyone wants to know the practical application of how we worked collaboratively, happy to chat about that later. The last thing I'd like to mention is that, as I mentioned a couple of times, we're trying to take a standards agnostic approach, but it's great in theory, but sometimes not so great in practice. It's difficult not to think in MARC, especially when that's how you've been trained. But when you're reading a policy and it doesn't make sense, often what we've been doing in the groups is discussing what the policy means and what does that mean in a practical context. And we're finding that we keep reverting to MARC naturally because that's how we think. This has really highlighted the need for us to focus on our RDA first approach as a priority and to encourage the workflows group to support this approach as well as they work to develop training materials to help us develop our training in the future. And that's it in a nutshell. I'll hand it back to Amy.
Sorry, I lost my unmute button there for a second. So where to from here? With the application profiles nearly complete, we're going to be looking to seek feedback from the LAS community. So please get in touch if you're interested in participating in that. We're also currently investigating how we're going to share the official RDA documentation with the Australian LAS sector. And at the moment, we're looking towards the German-speaking consortium model as a possible way to do this. However, we're really keen to find out other ways that that's being implemented across the world. So if you have any ideas of ways that we could do that, please get in touch. We'd love to know. So that's pretty much it for our future. We're still pretty early on. We've got our good plan. We're pretty much on track. And if you want to keep up to date with the project, there's a couple of places you can go. So you can visit the official RDA page on the NSLA website where we add quarterly updates. And on that page, you can also sign up to the mailing list as well. You're also welcome to send us an email directly at info@nasla.org.au with any questions or comments or inquiries about it. I manage that inbox, so it comes directly to me, so I can respond to that easily. We're also quite active on the NSLA LinkedIn page, so I recommend following us there if you want to have updates as well. And I've got that QR code on the screen if you're interested, or you can just search for NSLA in LinkedIn and you'll find us there as well. So that's pretty much it for the formal part of the presentation. So we're really here to answer your questions. We want to know what you're wanting to know, and we can dig in as deeply as you'd like. So yeah, please send your questions through to the Q&A and we'll answer them when we can. Thank you.
And Colleen, we do have a couple of questions already in the Q&A. So the first question comes from Charlotte, which is, do the maps list only the elements that will eventually be recorded in the MARC record, such as the title proper, or does it also include other element pages that are used in RDA to inform those values, such as title of manifestation?
Yes, the subsumed elements that we are grappling with. We are including any element that needs to be, whether or not you see it explicitly in a MARC 21 record, if you need to have a value for that element in order to get to another element, it must be in the application profile. Because otherwise, how is the policy statement group going to know that we need policies on this element? A really famous example, a really sort of classic example is when we're creating, when we are recording the author person of a work this person is the author. We record that value. We record them in using a structured recording method as a value of authorized access point for person. Of course, to get to authorized access point for person, you need to know the preferred name of person, and preferred name of person requires you to know the name of the person, which could also include things like fuller form of name, surname, given name, terms of rank, honor, or address. There's a whole bunch of different elements that you could put together before you get to that authorized access point. What do you see in your MARC record? Creator, author, author, person of work. But we definitely need to have policy statements at all of those. So what the application profile working group is thinking of doing is sort of creating sort of companion documentation where there's an application profile or set of application profiles that are for the policy statement working group, where it's like every single element that we need values for, or sorry, that we need options for, please, here's the list. But for the general community who wants to look at the application, actually use an application profile, a cut down version of that would probably be the better way to go. We are thinking to put both out for comment to see what, which of these application profiles works for the community, because I think that the community would prefer to have simpler application profiles, but, prove me wrong. That's just my assumption, and I could be very wrong. So yes, I hope that answers your question. Was that from Charlotte? Yeah. Yes, subsumed elements. Everything's going to be in there, whether or not you see it in the practical application profiles, up for debate.
Next question we have is, how would the MAP MPS be available to the wider cataloguing community through the RDA toolkit? I believe we did touch on that, Aimee.
Yeah, so we're aware that lots of the library sector don't have a subscription to the RDA toolkit, and we want to make this as widely available as possible. So we're looking towards the German-speaking consortium model, where they have a completely independent website that lists all their RDA decisions and application profiles. And I understand that they pay a licensing fee to the RDA organisation to allow them to do that, to ensure that they contribute to further management of RDA. So that's just one idea that we're looking at the moment, and we're open to any other suggestions as well, because we want to make this work as widely available as possible without it being limited to the RDA toolkit, knowing that people don't necessarily have access to that. It's really early days in the conversation for that. I figure we've got at least another year to really knuckle down what that's going to look like. But I think that if we can manage it the way the German-speaking consortia have managed it, I think that is an ideal way, but there may be better ways out there. So again, if you've got any ideas, please send an email to that info@nasla.org.au email address. We'd love to hear any thoughts that you have, because as I said, we want these to be as widely available as possible.
Good thing that you did touch on the German one, because Renata did ask if you could just explain how that model works for Germany.
Yeah, so as I mentioned, it's a separate website. It's all in German language. It's really interesting. You can translate it using Google Translate if you need to, but basically it's got all their application profiles and policy statements in there. So with the intention of having all the German languages have access to that. My understanding with that consortium was previously they covered the subscription access for people to access the RDA toolkit. So they were already providing access and paying for access in that way. They've just changed their model with this new process. Again, it's in early conversations at the moment, so we don't have a fully formed idea.
Next question that we have is, will training for libraries be part of the work that the project's currently doing? And do the institutions need to be part of NSLA?
So training is out of scope for this project. We're providing the documentation that we have to LSS educators in July 2026, we anticipate, to prepare for that. But within this project itself, it's purely around creating the documentation. So we don't have any plans in place around how the learning aspect will work. That did form a bit of the conversation in the scoping work. I don't know if Melissa wants to speak to that a little bit more. So it is considered, but the actual project that's in place now, it's not part of that.
Yeah, echoing Amy, we had to put training out of scope for this project because that's almost like a separate project. This project is getting all the tools ready, but NASA's not a training organization. So trying to organize training as a separate project after creating the necessary documentation is just what I call it.
Next question is, regarding the new spacing showing up in Libraries Australia records in 245, 264 and 300 since the recent changes to the services, are they RDA compliant? So this is more of a practical question.
Can you repeat those fields, Brad? Are those mark tags?
Tags, they are the 245, the 264 and the 300.
I'm going to say mostly yes. Yes, because that's the thing at RDA, almost everything is an option. So I think a lot of what we're seeing in data that's migrated is, yeah, a lot of the data that, some of the things that we're seeing in the data that's migrated, you could look at it through an RDA lens and be like, oh, so there's an option to use an unstructured description or unstructured recording method there, which is for many elements a completely valid choice. Do we like it? Not necessarily. Is it RDA compliant? Yes, because RDA is so flexible. In most cases, there's been a few things that I've seen that I've told or instructed catalogers to be like, you got to fix that. You got to fix it. It's okay, but fix it.
I think it's also worth noting that the co-leads have had a meeting with Trove Collaborative Services and will continue to have meetings to make sure that official RDA is compliant with their work as well.
The next question I'll probably steer to Colleen and Melissa. So we got someone who's wanting to know if you could show the working documents, so the map and the policy statements, and what they look like at the moment, because they're just a little bit curious.
It's currently in a spreadsheet at the moment. They're not very exciting. So for the policy statements, basically, they look kind of like what they do on the RDA toolkit. So how we've been working is we've basically been copy and pasting that into a spreadsheet with our, the policy and then the option and then the condition option if applicable, comparing it to the National Library New Zealand policy statement. And what we have, I'm happy to share my screen if people are actually genuinely interested about a spreadsheet, if you like. But yeah, we basically, oh yeah, okay, great, let's do that. Haven't done this yet on Zoom, so let's see how this goes. Oh, woohoo. I think that worked. Can everyone share my screen? See my screen? Great, let me click on something we've finished. So the very first one we worked on was normalized transcription. So as I said, fairly straightforward, very boring spreadsheet. We have the contents, the condition option. As I mentioned earlier, we primarily looked at the National Library of New Zealand's policy statements because they sort of applied, or they were the most similar to the Australian library context. Ignore that, that's a poor example. I'm going to pick something later. And then we also had a tag for each of the libraries that were represented here. And we literally did a tick or a cross, so whether we agreed or disagreed with the RDA policy statement. And where we had consensus, we just simply said apply or do not apply as applicable. But if I find a later example, I can show you how crazy some of this stuff looked. Let's me. Here we go. So, there are some examples where we may not have come to an agreement and we had a notes area. So once we completed everything, we just said complete, and then we just moved on to the next one. So it's pretty boring, pretty pretty bare, but replicates what the RDA toolkit currently looks like at the moment. I don't know if that's been helpful or not to, at least from the policy statements. Melissa's looks great though. You should see that.
Oh no. Again, it's all spreadsheets. Library land runs on spreadsheets. There. So you are seeing an application profile in, oops, no, you're not. Are you? I believe you are now. Okay. So this is the guts of an application profile. We have the label of the element in the toolkit. It's sort of identifier query. We've just put that in there for good measure. We're not sure. I was advised to do so many years ago by somebody who's quite technical. So I was like, okay. We include the domain and range of the element. So is the which the element is making a statement about, is it a work, expression, manifestation, or item? And if it is a relationship element, what's the end point of that relationship? For example, date, the dates that we record is the date of distribution or production or publication or copyright. We're making a statement about the manifestation. So the manifestation has a date of publication, distribution, manufacture, etc. And the value of that is equal to a date or a time span. So we have domain and range. We've included whether or not something is, its repeatability. And there's been challenges around repeatability. And again, mark encoding getting in the way because, in theory, we could repeat all the RDA elements, and particularly things like the author person or photographer person of a work. Ideally, we would, we can repeat that as many times as we want per RDA, but if you're in MARC, you can only have 1/100. So we're really kind of grappling with the min and the max and need to make it clear, whichever way we go, we need to justify the repeatability of an element and whether or not we've limited it per MARC, or we've just said this is pure RDA. We've included a MARC alignment because that's practical. We are in a MARC alignment. We are in a MARC 21 encoding environment. And we also talk about cardinality. This is a bit, cardinality. Like, is it mandatory if applicable, or optional? And a lot of discussion going about, well, if it's optional, why are we putting it in anyway? So, and what's the difference between optional and recommended? That's fun. Whether or not a vocabulary encoding scheme is part of whether or not we're going to invoke a vocabulary encoding scheme or control vocabulary when we are recording a value for that element, and that would only be applicable for things that are using a structured recording method. And of course, the recording method is in there as well, because RDA, many elements you have 4. There's unstructured, structured, identifier, and IRI recording methods. IRI is very futuristic. So for the most part, we're not reinventing the wheel here. We're just recording what do we currently do. So it's a lot of structured, unstructured, and identifier recording methods. Whether or not for things that are unstructured, whether or not we are going to be applying normalized or basic transcription. Got notes for the policy statement, and then possibly notes for us, or notes that we want to make to other users of the application profile, and then notes that we're just keeping for ourselves for now. So yes, that's an application profile, and I will stop sharing. Did I stop sharing yet? Stop share, there you are. Got it.
Renata did have a quick question, which is, did you say that you cut and pasted every option and condition from the toolkit?
Control A, Control C, Control V is your friend. That's all I can say on that matter. Thank you.
Okay. Gemma also put in a question, just wondering if the NSLA report that Melissa worked on will be made public at some point?
The report was intended for the NSLA board, but I can investigate to see if we can make that more widely available. And if so, we'll put it on the official RDA page on the NSLA website.
Will there be an attempt to write the documentation as much as possible in plain English, or will it be written in RDA speak?
Absolutely not RDA speak. And that's where the workflow, the final working group is coming together because like, for example, have you seen like the OLAC best practices? For example, there's the sort of best practices and the Online Association of Audiovisual Catalogers. They do the best, the most comprehensive, and you read it and you understand what you're supposed to do. That's what the workflow working group wants to achieve, is creating that really accessible documentation that you could just, it's plug and play, you understand it. And, you know, I can't promise that we will not be using RDA language in some, like we're going to have to talk about nomen sometime. There might be mentions of time span, but it's not going to be things like record as a value of nomen string. No, none of that language.
Next question comes from Jeff. Are your profiles set up to potentially use Wikidata content?
The sorry. We are grappling a little bit with that, Jeff, because we have a firm deadline and we are talking about sort of critical documentation. What do we absolutely need to have to support current practices and continuity? And as much as we'd like to, and then we're still, you know, finalizing things, as much as we'd like to include the identifier recording method, because Wikidata would be using the identifier recording method, and which is available for many of the elements that are defined in an application profile. We're not explicitly calling it out. Like we're not explicitly saying, you know, use identifier recording method, which would say, then bring in an IRI from somewhere. We're not doing that just because it's a little bit, we'd love to, but it's just a little bit beyond what's going to fit the needs of most Australian libraries.
Melissa. Next question is, again, going back to a bit of a marquee one. As part of official documentation, will example records in MARC be provided?
Of course. Yes. Yes. I mean, that's just so useful when you can see it in context. And that's, again, going back to the beautiful documentation of OLAC, the Online Association of Audiovisual Catalogers. You do see examples because it really helps. As much as we're told, don't create metadata descriptions using examples. Like you should kind of understand what you're doing. It's still very useful to be able to look at an example to just sort of put it together. So yes, example records, you bet.
And can I just add, if you're familiar with the RDA toolkit, there is an area when you're in your specific policy that you can, I don't have it up at the moment, I've just been locked out, but you can ask it to map for you. It won't give you an example, but it will give you the mark field that you would use. However, many policy statements would obviously have multiple mark fields, but that is available in the toolkit as well.
And I've also got Renata going, yes, she would also love to see the report that Melissa did. Just to add a little bit more that. Otherwise, they're the questions so far. So if anyone else would like to raise a question, just put it into the Q&A. And we can definitely answer it in this webinar, or as Aimee said, there is the contact details that you can email with questions or ideas. So I might wrap up this webinar then. So Again, thank you, Colleen, Melissa, and Amy for providing your updates on the official RDA implementation project. And basically what's going on in Australia for it. It's also nice to see that's being a collaborative approach with all of the national institutions, along with trying to involve COL and also IATSs as well. So again, if you want to be kept in the loop of everything that's happening with the official RDA project, check out the official RDA webpage on the NSLA website. I did copy the link into the chat earlier. And there's a little form at the bottom of that page where you can subscribe to the quarterly newsletters. Also, feel free to check out the AUDAC website. So let me just copy that into the chat. So AUDAC has a webpage on the RDA Toolkit website. And over the next couple of months, we're going to be doing a bit of a refresh to that webpage where you can see updates on webinars that we are planning. So we are planning for more into the future. There's also instructions on how to sign up to the AUDAC discussion lists. So you can see proposals and changes to RDA official as they come through. And also other things that we want to plan over the next couple of months as we change the website. A reminder that the webinar has been recorded, so you can, let me copy that link and paste it into the chat. So you'll be able to access this webinar and our previous AUDAC webinars through the RDA Toolkit channel on YouTube. And you can also access other RDA groups such as NARDAC or URIG on how they are approaching official RDA. Again, thank you for everyone who's come to this webinar, and we look forward to seeing you into our future webinars and also through the discussion lists. Thank you.